Hi, good to see you all. So welcome to our penultimate session. I'm Julie Haddon-Miller. I'm the EMCC Global Work Group Lead for the International Standards and Mentoring Coaching Programs. So thanks so much for joining us for this hour and a half that we have together before we then move into the final session, which is the close of the week. And it's been an incredibly busy week with all kinds of topics and sessions starting on Monday through to this evening. So I hope you've been able to join a variety of sessions this week. I'm seeing some very familiar faces on the call on the session this evening, so that's great. But hopefully you've been able to join some other sessions as well and really make the most of the week that we have. So I just have a very few slides and I really wanted to capture your expectations about what's brought you to this session this evening, so that we can focus on perhaps more of a conversation than slides. But I do have just a couple that I wanted to start with, and then perhaps I'll introduce the team that are here this evening to you. So they've come along to this session to understand hopefully more about the international standards in mentoring and coaching and how we might position those standards within the organisational context. And so really the purpose of this session is to discuss how we might apply ISMCP and what the benefits might be for those that are interested in engaging with it. So I thought I'd position the ISMCP framework among the 9 accreditation routes, and some of you will be very aware of the different accreditation routes for the EMCC Global, but some of you may not. So I thought one of the things you may be interested in once we've captured expectations is to, just briefly for me to touch on the 9 routes and how they fit together and map together, and where ISMCP sits within those 9 accreditation routes and how they align and they work together as a whole and really reinforce each other. I've got a couple of examples of ISMCP accreditations of 2 of our organisations, but I've also got a summary of the organisations that have been accredited since we introduced the route. So you can see perhaps the variety of different organisations from a whole variety of sectors and also locations around the globe. So I can show you that as well if that's something that you may be interested in. And of course, there's time for questions. So as I mentioned, I'm the work group lead for the ISMCP, and I joined EMCC back in 2015-16 when we first introduced ISMCP, which was 2016. And back then, ISMCP was our 5th accreditation route. So we had accreditation for coaches and mentors and for training providers. We had accreditation for supervision and training providers of supervision, and then we brought in ISMCP. And of course, many of you will know that since 2016, we've grown and developed to 9 accreditation routes, which includes program managers for mentoring and coaching, and more recently, team coaching. And that's for individuals and training providers. So whilst I focus on ISMCP, I'm part of a team, and many of those team members are here tonight, including Denise and Dana and Florentina and Jan and other members of the team. So I'm part of a wider team, and we all very much support across the different accreditation routes and help one another. But my 2 co-facilitators tonight are Dana and Florentina. So I'm going to come off the screen so we can see one another, and I'll just ask Dana and Florentina to introduce themselves to you. So Dana, starting with yourself.
Hi, welcome everyone. Really delighted to be able to join you this evening. I have been working alongside Julie and the team across multiple accreditations, but the ISMCP is one of the core ones in terms of supporting organizations to prepare for accreditation and understand what it entails, how it might benefit them, and then to organize themselves in the preparation of completing the assessment framework. And I also support through that assessment framework in the role of verifying. So Julie might talk about that as we move through the session. I have been a volunteer with EMCC since, I want to say 2018, perhaps 17, 18. And the work on the accreditation area, individual accreditation, program accreditation, has been so rewarding. As a master coach practitioner myself, having gone through that process myself, that was massive. It's given me such an appreciation for the personal benefits of doing that work and going through that process of best practice, and how it feeds, it feeds excellence. So delighted to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, Dana. Appreciate it. And Florentina.
I'll be brief. I'll say hello from Romania, from Bucharest, where it's quite late at this hour, but it's a pleasure to support the EMCC, and it's always a pleasure to learn through doing volunteer work. I can say in short words that I'm a mentoring geek. I both have the accreditation for coach and mentor, and for individual program manager for mentoring and coaching programs. But I do my best in my country to promote mentoring, and recently in a combination with the digitalization. And I do all I can, and everything it's in my forces to promote and to support the development of mentoring. So this is why I'm doing this volunteer work on mentoring in this group of ISMCP or in the other mentoring group. So I'm happy to see so many with us this evening, and we are welcome you, and we are waiting to answer to your questions. Enjoy. Thanks, this evening.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And of course, many of you will know Denise. I made an assumption there that many of you will, but Denise has been able to join us this evening. I think Denise has been able to join most of the sessions this week. And of course, well, Denise, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Just very briefly, Julie, it's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces. Gosh, what a week. What a fantastic week of dialogue, energizing questions, interactions. So thank you so much for your contributions to the week, and I really hope you enjoy this session. I'm sure you will. The ISMCP is such a fantastic way of energizing that dialogical process with organizations and really celebrating the excellence of what people are doing. So yeah, it would be great to get your feedback, to get your questions and your ongoing conversations in relation to the organizations in which you work. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Denise. So what we wanted to start with is just a question around what brought you here this evening. So what was it? Was it a question? Was it any aspect in particular of ISMCP that you were interested in exploring? So I wondered if you might just take a moment and just jot down in the chat box what brought you here this evening, because we've kept the session quite fluid tonight in terms of whether we go into breakout groups or stay in one room, and that will help us in organising the session. So if I could ask you just to take a minute or two, and as I say, just pop in the chat box, what brought you here this evening? What's your interest? And then we can, to some extent, plan the session from there, if you wouldn't mind. So I'll be quiet for a moment and let you think and jot something down, and then we'll go from there and keep it very flexible. Learn about the process, the accreditation process. Oh, possibly apply for the award. Oh, that's Maria. Yes, hi, Maria. Yeah, possibly apply for it. Yeah. Learn more about the application over time, building a culture of coaching. That's a great point there around building a culture. We've certainly got some examples of that, building a mentoring and coaching culture. Yeah, convincing organisations to invest in ISMCP, understand profits, but the fees, yeah, so we can think about that. Best practices, convincing boards about the benefits of ISMCP, listen understanding. See how it applies to US companies, and what it's all about. So what's it all about? That's a good one there, isn't it? So what's it all about, ISMCP? Okay, so I think for the majority of you, it's to listen, to learn, to find out more about it. So I can certainly spend a few minutes doing that. I think for some of you, there's the aspect of really understanding value. How do you persuade stakeholders? Now, I might ask Dana actually to have a think about that particular one, because Dana has experience of Northern Trust, and they're an exemplary example actually of how stakeholders really champion I think ISMCP within the organisation. And Dana was also involved in the assessment of Northern Trust, and I'm just going to share a quote with you. So Dana, can I ask you to have a think about that one in particular? Not to answer now, but in a few minutes, once I've gone through a couple of core slides, perhaps, as to how to convince organisations and stakeholders to invest in it. Because I think Northern Trust is a really good example of that.
Will do.
Yeah, super. And also, how does it apply? So let's have a look. So we've got some more questions here. Practices, best practices. And perhaps the aspects of the cultural aspect, so building a coaching or perhaps building a mentoring culture. So perhaps, Florentina, I might ask you to have a think about that question, how to build a mentoring or coaching culture, perhaps in a few minutes again. And what we might do, depending on where we get to, we might go into breakout groups. Those of you that are perhaps interested in how to get stakeholders to invest, perhaps we might go off with Dana in a group, and perhaps those who are interested in building a mentoring coaching culture, perhaps with Florentina. And I think actually Maria is here with us this evening. I think that's something, yes, hi Maria there. That's something you might actually be able to talk about, is actually building a mentoring or coaching culture, because again, I think that your case example is a really super example of building a culture. So that's something perhaps that you might be able to share with those that are interested in that aspect. And then perhaps if there's anything else, then some colleagues might stay with me and I can answer other peripheral questions perhaps. So we'll see where we get to, but that feels like that might be a way forward when we've just looked at a couple of core slides perhaps to answer those sort of generic questions about ISMCP. So that sounds like that might work. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. And let's just move to, so I've got your expectations. Now, what we'll see on the next slide, I just wanted to show this to some of you because some of you may be aware of the 9 weeks, and certainly got a lot of the team here tonight, which obviously are aware, and how they fit together. Now, what we can see on this slide is we can actually see all 9 of our accreditation routes. So what we see in row 2 is our individual accreditation routes, of which there are 4. They are paired and matched with our training provider accreditation routes, which of course there are 4 that match those. And then ISMCP is the accreditation route that is the umbrella that actually covers all aspects of accreditation within organisations. So if I look at the second column relates to individual accreditation for mentors and coaches, and then the training accreditation. The third column is the supervision accreditation for individuals and supervision training. The fourth column is the accreditation for individuals for programme management. And we've got some of our accredited programme managers here this evening, which is super. And we've got the accreditation for programme manager training. And then the final column, we've got our individual team coaching accreditation route, and we've got our training provider accreditation. Now, ISMCP is the accreditation for organisations that have mentoring and coaching programmes. And often I'm asked the question, well, what is the difference between a training programme and ISMCP? So a training programme will be a training provider that would train, for example, mentors and coaches to be competent and qualified in mentoring and coaching. A programme is an organisation that will, for example, recruit, select, match, train, support, and evaluate mentoring and coaching relationships, so both mentees and mentors and coaches. So a really good example of that would be Medicine Sans Frontières, that has a global mentoring program that typically is someone that is a fast appointment to a role in the field on a mission, will be matched with an experienced mentor that's worked in that role, worked in that region, that kind of mission, and that mentor will support them for the duration of the mission. And that's what ISMCP does. It accredits and recognises those programs. Now, within ISMCP, we're also able to accredit the training and individual mentors and coaches, for example. So there are organisations, which I'll show you in a moment, that have what we call triple accreditation. So that's ISMCP with their EQA training accreditation with embedded individual accreditation. So they have the triple. Some organisations actually have more than that. So they're also looking towards their supervision accreditation as well. And that's all captured within ISMCP. That's all captured within it. Right, so this is very briefly the competence framework that we use for training, which is also used to review the training within ISMCP. So when we're looking at the training provided for mentees and mentors, coaches and coaches, we use this competence framework, which is embedded within our individual and training provider accreditation. So ISMCP is an independent accreditation awarded for the design, delivery and evaluation of mentoring programs, typically in-house, but could be external as well. And we're looking at the extent to which the program is thoughtfully designed, it's systematically managed, and it's contributing to the development, the overall development of the participants, the organisation, and aligns with the organisation's strategy. So there's a clear alignment there between the two. And we look at that particularly when we are assessing. So there's a framework of standards, and in terms of the benefits, it really does add credibility and substance to mentoring programs. And I'll show you a couple of examples and quotes in a moment from our accredited organisations. This is a snapshot. So I took this last night, actually, because I thought this might be of interest. So you can see the different kinds of organisations that are accredited through ISMCP, different locations and the level as well. So we have 3 levels of bronze, silver, gold, gold being the highest level. So, for example, we have MSF, Doctors Without Borders, in the US. We've got our Istanbul University, which is in Turkey. We've got a wonderful membership organisation for pilots and aircrew, Resilient Pilots in the UK. We've got TOFAS in Turkey, the Sherry Blair Foundation, that global entrepreneurial mentoring programme in the UK, but across over 100 countries. We've got another university in Ireland, Munster Technological, Untapped AI, so a coaching organisation that uses artificial intelligence in the UK, but entirely online. Northern Trust, of which Dana will be able to talk about that as an example, perhaps, of that stakeholder engagement and, persuading organisations to invest in the benefits of ISMCP. We've got the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and then we've got MSF in Belgium for their global programme. And actually MSF Belgium was the first organisation to accredit, and actually that's head office, but the core team are actually based in Norway. So that's where the core team are, the mentoring coaching hub. I found a couple of quotes actually that I thought might be of interest, and this is the Sherry Blair Foundation that achieved the gold standard of accreditation. And what they described, and fortunately they presented on Monday as well, is that going through the accreditation exercise really enables the mentoring team to take a moment to take stock, truly reflect on the nature and the content of the programme in its entirety, because we look at every aspect of the programme. And as a team, we're often delivery focused, but this reflection time has allowed us to look at the programme as a whole. And as you'll know, reflection is very much at the heart of everything that we do. That reflective practice, whether it's individual level or training or within ISMCP, enabling the reflection of the impact of what it is that we're doing. The Northern Trust, so Dana will be familiar with this. So our accreditation journey to date has provided us with the opportunity to pause, truly assess the effectiveness of our programme. It has enabled us to identify gaps, discuss them openly within the committee, and agree on the optimum path to enhance our programme. By engaging with the EMCC Global, we're able to learn more about the practicalities of mentoring best practices, openly discuss challenges, and embrace opportunities to drive our programme further. So whilst there are a number of organisations that have achieved the gold standard, our highest level, there are always opportunities to learn, to develop, to innovate, and always to continue to improve our programme practice for mentoring and coaching. So I thought it might be useful to share just a couple of quotes there. Okay, so before we go into breakout rooms, I wondered if perhaps you might want to just make a note of, if we were to have 3 rooms, which room would you be interested in moving into? So Dana is going to look at the aspect of stakeholder engagement and how to persuade organisations or boards or key stakeholders to invest in ISMCP accreditation. So Dana's going to look at that. So you might want to pop your name in the chat box if you're interested in having a conversation with Dana about that. Florentina, and perhaps if I can ask Maria, can talk about building a mentoring and coaching culture. And I'm sure, hopefully, Maria, there's some aspects you'll be able to share there. So if you're interested in building a culture, a mentoring coaching culture, if you want to pop in the chat box, Florentina, I can then move you into Florentina's room with Maria. Yeah. Anybody else that wants to talk or discuss any other aspect that's not either persuading key stakeholders and investing in ISMCP or building a culture, you're welcome to stay in the main room with me. And perhaps I might ask, for example, Jan to stay in the main room, and then we can address any wider questions that there might be that don't apply to those two. So we've got a couple of colleagues that want to have a conversation with Dana, a couple of colleagues with Florentina. Great. I'll just give it another minute for colleagues to jot down preferred breakout rooms and themes. And then I say, the remainder of the group can stay with myself to answer any general questions. Whilst you're thinking about which room, it's 5 to 8. So what I suggest is that if we go into the breakout room for perhaps 20 minutes, and then we'll come back into the main room and perhaps share any insights that you might have. If you are finished a few minutes earlier, you're welcome to come back to the main room early if you'd like to. So just exit the breakout, you can come back. Or if you just want to have a 5-minute comfort break, you're very welcome to have a short comfort break if you'd like to. Right, so for those of you that are here, any questions you'd like to discuss at all, or themes about ISMCP, and you're welcome just to pop your hand up if you'd like to, and then we'll go around the room. Yes, yeah. Who'd like to go first? Yes, Inez, hi.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. I would like to know how an organization, what's the path for an organization to get an accreditation?
Sure. So I didn't prepare a slide actually on the process, but I can talk you through that. And then what I would say, by the way, to everybody, if there's any specific follow-up questions that you have, on the slides are my contact details. So after the session, you're more than welcome to get in contact. Very happy to have a one-to-one if you want to just talk any aspects through. So don't feel that it's just this evening, you know, that very happy to meet up afterwards. So the starting point is, first of all, for an organisation to let us know they're interested. And what typically happens is myself or one of the teams, such as Jan or Dana, will then have an initial conversation with the organisation. So it always starts with a conversation, first of all, and will help in talking an organisation through the process of engaging with ISMCP. If an organisation says, yes, you know, they're keen to potentially look at accreditation, once we've had that initial conversation, we'll then sort of stay with them and have those follow-up conversations. But we'll typically talk them through the guide, that there's a guide to applying, and there's an application form. So the starting point is to complete the application form. And in that application form, you'll see that there are 6 core standards. And within that, there are also some supporting what we call indicators within the 6 standards. And what the organisation will do is it will put together the evidence that it's meeting the core standards of the framework. And the assessment team will help with that. So we'll support and help with putting that together. And it's rather like, if you imagine putting together a portfolio, it's rather like that. So it's putting together a portfolio of evidence. Now, at the time of applying for ISMCP, we appoint what we call an EMCC Global Assessor to work with the organisation. But that role is very much a collaborative role. We tend to think of it as a thought partner. It's a supportive role, and it's based on conversation and constant reflection and review. So that individual will work and stay with the organisation to ensure that their portfolio meets the criteria for accreditation. Alongside the evidence, there's the dual aspect where the assessor will ask to review the evidence and then to meet with the programme team. So typically it might be a group online discussion via Zoom, or it might be they meet with the team individually, depending on the preference of the organisation. And the assessor will also ask to meet with a selection of either mentors and mentees or coaches and coachees, which are selected by the organisation, because ultimately it nearly always comes down to availability. So who's available within the time frame? So it's the practicality of the availability. So the assessor can either meet, for example, 3 or 4 mentees and 3 or 4 mentors, either in a group online, or they can meet with them individually. And what they'll typically do is they'll send the questions in advance. So the organisation will have the questions in advance that the assessor wants to explore. And often what happens is they want to get to know the programme from those different perspectives, the programme management team, key stakeholders, and also the participants, to really understand their experience of the programme. But also, if there's any gaps in the portfolio, obviously the discussion with the participants can help fill those gaps. Then when the interviews have taken place, the assessor will then write a report, and that very much is a collaborative effort. So it's a collaboration between the assessor and the organisation. And that report will then go to what we call a verifier. And you had Dana said earlier as part of the introduction that she's both an assessor and a verifier, but they are 2 different roles. And the verifier will review the portfolio, will review the interview analysis, and then they'll write a report. Apologies for my puppy barking in the background. By the way, my son is with the puppy, but I don't know quite what's happening. So apologies if you can hear that. He was under strict instructions this evening to play with the puppy. So apologies if you can hear that in the background. So the verifier will then send that report to the assessor, and then that goes to the organisation, and the organisation has a chance to review and discuss it with the team before the final report then goes to what we call a chair. And the chair panel then will meet with the assessor and the verifier, review the content, and review the recommendation, and typically always agree with the recommendation. Typically, I don't think in the 6 years we've been doing this, I don't think a chair panel has yet disagreed with the recommendation that's been made by the team. And then the accreditation is awarded, and the accreditation lasts for 3 years, at which point it's renewed by the organisation. Now, that's a lot of information in this. I'm just conscious I've talked for a few minutes there, and it's a lot there. So is there anything you want to ask?
Yes, it's beautiful. I just, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the application. And if you could put a link where we can download it, because we have some organizations that are clients that could very easily maybe apply there, so that they can realize how near they are in those competencies. And I like the reflective practice approach.
Yes, that
you do with mentors.
Yes, I can see Denise is busy typing now. I think any moment those links are going to appear in the chat box, I think. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Charlotte will add them, or will definitely share them in his, no problem.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, we'll get those added. And as I say, on these slides, which obviously you can access, you've got all of the emails for myself and any of the other accreditation routes as well. So my colleagues, Chandana and Shelley, that look after individual and training accreditation. We've also noted down their emails as well. So if you're interested in any aspect of accreditation after the session, obviously you'll be able to contact ourselves. Yeah, no problem at all, Ines. That's a really great point. Okay, so what would be the next aspect we'd like to explore? Who'd like to go next? And you're welcome to pop your hand up or just unmute if you'd like to. Oh, yes. Yeah, hi. Good to see you.
Hello. My question is, could you please comment a bit on the differences between gold, silver, and bronze?
Sure. Yeah. So the gold level is the highest standard. So what the organization has to achieve overall is 90% overall across the 6 core standards, and no less than 80% in each of the 6. So that would be gold level. Silver level is 80% overall across the 6 core standards, and no less than 70% for each individual core standard. And the bronze is 70% overall and no less than 60% across each of the 6 core standards. So that's the key difference between bronze, silver, gold. And as you can see from the slide that I presented earlier, we've had organizations that have accredited across the 3 levels. So we've had bronze, silver, and gold. So we've had all 3. Does that help? Great.
It does. Another question. Question is, I'm not sure if this is something you want to comment right now, but what about the costs for this?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's also a question about time that I saw as well. So time and cost. So time, it varies so much, because if I give you an example, when we worked with the Royal New Zealand Air Force, they were coming up to their 10-year mentoring anniversary, and they really wanted to be able to celebrate their accreditation for their 10-year anniversary. So they said, could it be done within a 2 to 3 month window from start to finish? So we managed it in that 2 to 3 month window, and they were able to have the certificate in their hand for their 10-year celebratory event. So that was 2 to 3 months from the very beginning of, yes, we'd like to accredit, to having the certificate in their hand, the 2 to 3 months. Other organisations might be longer. So I'll give you the other example of Médecins Sans Frontières. So they said, we'd like to accredit, we're not really sure where we are in terms of level. So could we have some support to do a pre-assessment first, to see where we are? So I went and did a pre-assessment with them. I went over to Norway, spent a week with them actually, reviewed their training, attended their training program, and I did a pre-assessment. Now, when we did the pre-assessment, in one of the areas, the 6 areas, they were not bronze. So they hadn't achieved bronze in the pre-assessment. So what they said is, let's identify some key next steps. Let's develop these aspects of the programme and come back in 6 months, and then we'll accredit in 6 months, because we think that's how long it's going to take us to put the plans in place. So that's what they did. 6 months later, they then applied. They'd made some changes. They put some plans in place and actioned these plans, and they ended up actually achieving gold in the end, which was amazing. But it is an amazing program. So from start to finish, it was actually 12 months, because there was a pre-assessment phase. Then they said, we're going to do some work for 6 months. They did some work, and then by the time they sort of portfolio, it was 12 months in total. So that's a different example. And there wasn't quite the urgency, it wasn't quite necessary to sort of have the certificate and to be holding it in their hand for a particular event. So that was MSF. So yes, Ines.
Yes, please excuse me. I've had the situation of internal coaches or HR people who would like to have their own, I wouldn't say if it is a credential or an accreditation, but like in improvement, you have like green belts, black belts, or do we have something similar for the team leaders or the leaders of this process within the organization that is accrediting?
Yeah, so individuals within the organization itself, those that are leading the program.
So do we have like I don't know whether it is a credential like ESIA for supervisors? Do we have like a special credential for they may not be certified coaches, but they would have coaching skills, and they would be leading these teams during the organization accrediting. Am I making sense?
Yes, I think you are. Yes, because we do have, if I go back to the 9 accreditation routes, so we do have a variety of individual accreditation routes. So individual coach mentors, team coaches, supervisors, and of course, program managers as well. I don't know whether, Denise, you wanted to comment at all on that with regards to the variety of individual accreditations.
I'll just put a quick note in the chat, Ines, because the group that you're talking about will be the leaders, the HR people, the huge number of different personnel within an organization. They might be HR, they might be chief executive, they may be leaders, managers across the whole organization. Our individual accreditation, our EMCC individual accreditation, is precisely for that, for leaders who are using coaching and or mentoring skills as part of their wider leadership role. So the brilliant thing within the ISMCP is that the EIA can be awarded as part of the dialogical process to really celebrate the excellence of the leadership using those mentoring coaching skills as part of the wider context within the organization. So it's a very, very simple yes, it certainly can. And increasingly, we are getting a huge number of leaders. And by leaders, we mean all leaders across the organization, not necessarily just senior leaders, but aspiring leaders in different parts and different responsibilities. So it's a wonderful opportunity because the EIA does frame the ongoing development of the individual as a leader, and it celebrates that ongoing excellence of their role within the context of the organization, of course. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Denise. Thank you. Now, cost. Yeah, so let's come to that. So the cost for ISMCP accreditation is €2,995, and that is then valid for 3 years. Now, at the point of renewal, so that's every 3 years, the cost is then €1,550.
Okay.
So
could you please say the numbers again?
Yeah, sure. €2,995 for accreditation. I'll put this in the chat box as well.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And then the renewal, which is 3 years later, I'll just pop this in the chat box. 3 years is €1,550. I've just popped that in the chat box for you.
And is it valid for another 3 years, or
it
then?
is.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's every 3 years that organisations renew. For training provider accreditation, the renewal actually is every 5 years. And the reason for that is that often with training, the framework doesn't change significantly in a 3-year window. So therefore, it's 5 years. What we find with mentoring and coaching programs is there can actually be quite significant changes. So therefore, the renewal is every 3 years. And as I said, I just put the cost in the chat box. Oh, sorry, I didn't put the actual cost of the renewal. Let me just pop that in. Yeah. Let me just pop that in there.
Okay. I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, of course.
The fact that an organization is accredited doesn't necessarily automatically guarantee individual accreditations, right?
Sorry, it doesn't guarantee
individual accreditations for the coaches within the organization.
No. So what we tend to do is we adopt the approach of when we carry out an ISMCP accreditation, typically an organization is training their mentors and mentees, because that's part of the requirements for ISMCP. So what we tend to do is review in detail the training provision, and that's one of the 6 core standards, core standard 2, the training provision for mentors or coaches. And then in that review of the training provision and using the competence framework, we will typically, with organizations, accredit their training at the same time when we accredit the program. Now, what we also do is we recognize those individuals that are being trained, the mentors and the coaches, and we're then able to offer individual accreditation at the point of ISMCP accreditation. And when we do that, it's just significantly easier for the organisation to do that, because it's all done at the same time, and it's quite a seamless process for the training to be accredited and then to recognise those within the training, to accredit them and recognise their practice. So, for example, Médecins Sans Frontières, they have triple accreditation. So their programme, their training and their mentors are accredited, as are the Royal New Zealand Air Force. They have triple accreditation. And very much that's where organisations are moving to. So in terms of future practice, they're moving to, when we're going to accredit the programme, we're also going to recognise the training, and we're going to also recognise and accredit those individuals as well. Yeah. Right, I can see some questions coming in. Is the cost the same for all levels for ISMCP? Yes, it is. So whether an organisation is bronze, silver or gold, it's the same cost, because the cost isn't based on the level. The cost is based on the time it takes for the team to support and assess and verify the application with the organisation. So it's based on time and resources. It's not based on the outcome of the application. Now, there was also a question around, so Carlos, so you've got your ITC accreditation. What do I have to do to renew your ITC and how? So great question. Now, when you received your ITC accreditation, Carlos, did you receive a congratulations email from EMCC Global that said, congratulations, and this is your ITC accreditation, here's your level? Do you remember receiving that, Carlos? I'm not sure if you're able to unmute or to let us know that you're here, or just pop a message in the chat box if you're not able to. Okay, well, don't worry, Carlos. Perhaps I'll put a note in the chat box later. So, for the benefit of, yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, Charlotte's so on the ball, isn't she? Oh, there you go, Carlos. Hi. Great. Do you remember receiving the email? Which would have been, well, it would have been 2020. So the 11th of November, 2020, Carlos. So you can't recollect the email now because it was a couple of years ago.
Okay, thank you.
We did.
No.
We did, yeah.
Brilliant. So what would have happened, Carlos, is when you receive the congratulations email, it tells you the date that you're going to be renewing, and it tells you what you need to do. So it sets out the process for renewal, and it also sets out the links to the logs that you have to maintain. So, for example, one of the logs you'll maintain is your client practice. So your record of client practice. You'll maintain, for example, your record of your CPD, your continuing professional development. So those logs will have been in the email that you need to maintain along with the renewal application form. And that's what you do in 2024. Now, if you can't find that email, Charlotte, perhaps we could take a next step to resend the email to Carlos, and then all the information is contained in that email. Would that help, Carlos?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can just send you
that's clear, very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, sometimes, and I do it myself, we get the congratulations email with it, oh, wonderful, great, and then we file it away. And then we forget about it. And then suddenly we think, oh, well, where's the application form to renew? Because, we've filed it away somewhere. So, yeah, but perhaps we can send you a reminder in a sense. So you've got everything there in front of you that you need. If we could just follow up with that, Charlotte, that would be great. Thank you. Right. So then there was another question. So Emmanuel, at first, what will the organisation get? Is it gold, silver? How does it go? Yeah, so Emmanuel, you're there. Yes, so the level very much depends on the evidence supplied by the organisation. So really, it's down to the organisation as to whether they're bronze, silver or gold. And the assessor works really in partnership, in consultation with the organisation to help them understand what level they are based on their current practices, processes and structures. So, so the assessor will help in understanding that. Now, when the organisation renews after 3 years, at that point, they could upgrade. So, for example, we've got an organisation currently that's bronze, and when they upgrade, they're very keen actually to upgrade to gold, but they may start with upgrading to silver first and then moving to gold. Organisations could upgrade before, but they typically don't with ISMCP. So they typically wait the 3 years and then they renew. And at that point, they may upgrade for their renew. But yeah, it doesn't have to go bronze, then silver, then gold. An organisation can enter at gold level. Equally, they could enter at bronze, but then when they renew in 3 years' time, they could move to gold. It really just very much depends on the organisation's processes and structure that they have with their programme. Does that help, Emmanuel? Hopefully. Right, so other questions? Are there any other questions? Because our breakout groups will be returning in a moment. You're welcome, Emmanuel, thank you. So our breakout groups will be returning in a moment. If there are any other questions, if you want to just pop them in the chat box, you're very welcome to do so. And I'm going to bring back our 2 groups and let's hear what they've discussed. So bear with me. And then I'm keen just to give you a short break before we move into the closing session a bit later. So let's just close all the rooms.
Just for curiosity, how many companies do you currently have that are under the ISMCP?
Sure, I'll share the slide with you and then you can see how many organisations. So we currently have 10 organisations accredited, and we have currently 2 that are currently being reviewed at the moment, due to be accredited early next year, possibly actually the end of this year. One's very close to find accreditation this year, and then one early next year. And we have several other organisations that are currently in consultation with some of our assessment team. So we're potentially going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 by the end of next year. Somewhere between 15 and 20 we anticipate by the end of next year.
So it's a pre-select group?
To an extent, from the perspective of, I think that it's for some, it's a big step in recognising their programme, I think. And it does take time and to some extent resources, obviously, to work through the ISMCP accreditation. So for some organisations, what we've found is they'll think about it for some time. They might think about it for a year or 2 years before they actually take the step to accredit. So, for example, we've had one organisation that's been thinking about it for 2 to 3 years, and obviously because of the pandemic, they haven't progressed it, but they are going to be accrediting next year. So I think the last 3 years in particular have been quite tricky for organisations to have the time and the resources, and it hasn't necessarily been a priority over the last 3 years to accredit their programmes. But we are seeing a renewed interest this year, and we've had several actually accredit this year. So I'd have thought we'll be somewhere in the region of, say, 15 to 20 organisations. And welcome back our 2 breakout groups. We just had a question around how many organisations have accredited with ISMCP, and I was just re-showing the slide, and I was just saying that over the last 3 years, a lot of organisations have shown an interest, but obviously because of the pandemic, it's been sort of lower on their priority list. But I think we'll find that we're somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 by the end of next year of those organisations that are accredited with ISMCP. Yeah.
Julie, actually, right. as you were talking there, I was thinking of TOFAS, and through the pandemic, they adapted their program into a digital and online format. So a lot of organizations have gone through that journey as well, and are trying to just stabilize, settle their feet, get the impact reports in order to be ready to submit with programs that have been adapted through the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting, and thanks for saying that, Dana, because on Monday night we heard from Medicine Sans Frontières, and what they described is their program again is 10 years old. So prior to the pandemic, all of their training was face-to-face. So they would fly a group of mentors from all over the world, for example, to Belgium, and they would deliver face-to-face training, residential, in a hotel. When we had the pandemic, they had to move all of their training online. And they've continued to deliver online because there are huge environmental benefits of not flying 20 people all around the world to Belgium, and the cost benefits, just a whole variety of benefits. But they completely had to, in a sense, redesign their training because of the pandemic. So yeah, lots of organisations obviously in that situation. I think we'll see that with those that are accrediting next year, the changes that they've made. And yeah, and Esther, the question you just mentioned there in the chat box about motivating Mobilise to learn and grow, and how do you infuse that culture? Yeah, so perhaps let's hear from the breakout group that discussed developing a mentoring coaching culture, and to hear about perhaps what you talked about, and then we'll come to Dana with that. How do we engage with stakeholders and encourage key stakeholders to invest in accreditation? Yeah, so Florentina and Maria.
I will say a few words, and I will ask Maria and Esther, because we are only three and I have to leave earlier.
Yeah.
So we agree that first it's important to check if the organization is ready in that moment for this implementation, but not excluding that will be ready in near future, and to support this readiness. We agree that it's important to any organization, as any person, it's coachable, mentorable, and has a potential to be this. So we not exclude anybody from this. So it's important to check first if the mentoring or coaching program, in order to develop the learning culture, it's a right moment. And few elements to check and are important in this development of learning, coaching, mentoring culture. It's to check the if the learning is related to, or the strategy of learning of people or development of people, it's connected with the main strategy of the organization, and if it's cascaded. It is important for this. And related to this, it's important to connect the board of directors as sponsors or as a role models in the implementation. And another element, it's related to the culture of the organization on giving feedback. How they are used already to give constructive feedback, and what kind of learning programs they already have. For example, if it's a mentoring program on leadership with the aim of developing the leadership, it's important to see what kind of other leadership trainings they have, and what kind of learning there. This is more. Maria, please add something else if you want. Or
thanks, Florentina. Yeah, Maria.
I totally agree with everything Florentina said, and she's covered everything. So well done.
Oh, great. Thanks, Maria.
No
now,
worries.
there's a few. Thank you very much. And there's a few points and questions from Esther. Yes, Esther, did you want to unmute? And we'll just talk through those.
I was in the same team as Florentina, and I'm sorry to admit that I'm actually very confused. And I am not getting there. You can give accreditation to companies that want this, not those who need it. And the needing and wanting in most companies is like opposed. It's easy to coach, teach, mentor the converted, not the other way around. And that is what we want to do a systemic and global way.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah. So if I take so let me give you I suppose a case study example, and you're absolutely right, Esther, you need both. So if I give you the example of MSF, so they created their program, their mentoring program 10 years ago. Now they had significant issues around turnover, around staff retention, around burnout, and around leadership development. So people transitioning into senior roles in the field. So one of the things they looked at creating, now how do we address this? So they addressed it in multiple ways. One of the ways in which they addressed it, particularly the turnover, retention, transition into more senior roles and burnout, was actually through the development of a mentoring program. Now, they weren't necessarily set as objectives of the program, but when we did the impact evaluation in 2019, so 7 years into the program, they were outcomes of the mentoring program that we saw mentees and mentors on the program that described how, because of the mentoring that they received, they decided to stay with MSF. Had it not been for the mentoring, they would have left MSF. So we saw a significant correlation between the mentoring and the impact on turnover, the impact on retention, the impact on transition. So, for example, we had mentees that said, because of the mentoring, I am now going to another region, to another mission, and MSF has another mission as a consequence of the mentoring. So when you have that data, and I suppose this is coming back to this now coming to sort of Dana's group in a sense, when you have that data that shows that the well-being is improved, the transition to more senior leadership roles has increased, the turnover has reduced as a consequence of the mentoring, people stay within MSF and transition to different regions, to different missions. When we have that data, it then becomes much easier to persuade those that are more senior in the organisation to invest in the programme and to continue to develop and build the programme. And then more and more people get involved. So when Agnese presented the programme on Monday, their numbers of those that are involved in the programme are in the thousands. So we're not talking about 100 people, 200 people, we're talking about thousands. And when you have those kinds of numbers, you're then starting to create a cultural shift in the organisation. And so there does need to be a motivation, a want to have mentoring, to see mentoring as a benefit, to invest in mentoring, but there also needs to be a need as well. So with the most effective and impactful programs that we see, whether it's through impact evaluations or longitudinal data, there is both a want and a need to have these programs within the organisation. And so both of those are equally as important. If there isn't a desire, then whether there's a need or not, if there isn't a desire and a want to have a program and to develop a culture, it's not going to work. If there's a desire and a want, but there isn't actually a need for it, then again, that may not work either. So I think, Esther, when you say want and need, they're both equally and absolutely critical in developing a culture and moving to the second point and Dana's group around securing investment. So I'm not sure if that helps a little more in gaining some clarity, Esther.
Thank you for that elusive description.
You're very welcome, very welcome. So Dana, that leads really nicely to your group actually around persuading stakeholders. Apologies if I've stolen your thunder there, apologies. Yeah.
At all. It was actually one of the core discussions we had in the group in terms of recognizing that if an organization is looking at ISMCP accreditation, they have a program that they've been running for a minimum of, a year or more. Yeah. So they're doing it already. It's in progress, it's in action. So in terms of the starting point that I like to take is how are they currently measuring the impact and the return on investment? And getting to the core kind of motivations and values of having set up and kind of launched a mentoring program to begin with. So in a, I suppose in a sense, you can say they're already in and they're already invested. And what the ISMCP accreditation path allows them to do is to get an objective benchmark of whether they are reaping the greatest value and benefit from the program that is operating already. So I suppose it's an and a plus in that regard. And then as a secondary benefit, having gone through the program, to say, well, actually, we've asked, we've gone through the evaluation, we've got our recommendations and our results. And yes, we are doing all these things really well. And now we have a path for further development and improvement. And then they can promote that. I think, as Julie was saying, there are organizations that think about this for years. And I think that's not a bad thing, because it's not something that gets handed out willy-nilly. It is not a paper process. It is a meaningful and deep evaluation that results in very tangible and practical recommendations for continued improvement, in order to attain those high standards, in order to genuinely reap the rewards and benefits of an investment that they have already made in their organization and in their people. So for a very small monetary investment, they're actually amplifying their value tenfold, having already gone down that path, and they're already on that journey. It just kind of makes sense,
Yeah. Lovely. Thanks.
I don't know if Linda or Agnes have anything to add in terms of what came out through our conversation, ladies.
Well, I think Dana is a rock star. She's just amazing, and everything makes so much sense. So I'm going to try to see if I could invite her or somebody that might be time zone appropriate to some forums where there are organizational leaders who could hear this, because I think it just needs advocacy. It needs marketing, and it needs advocacy, and that starts at the top. So they need to hear that this is available, it's possible, and the benefits. I just think it's fabulous. And Dana is just an amazing advocate and representative for you all.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that. Agnieszka, would you like to comment?
What was new for me was to look at the ISMCP accreditation as a type of consulting process. Really thoughtful consulting process with a clear, thoughtful, said in simply words framework. So it is very practical for organization for this, let's say, small amount of money. So I was really impressed with this argument, with this, not argument, but with this tip for me, to show it, to present it as a consulting framework. So thank you, Dana.
You're welcome, Agnes.
I think that's very appropriate, that choice of language around a consulting framework, because it very much is a consultative, very much a partnership relationship. Very much the assessor is very much a thought partner. So that thought partner, that consultation process, obviously what they are doing is providing that expertise, because all of our team, the work group team, they're all experts in ISMCP and the standards and the process. So they're providing that expertise that typically a consultant would, but they're acting as a thought partner, and they're supporting through that consultation. So I think that's a really, really useful choice of language, Agnieszka. So thank you very much for sharing.
Actually, Julie, something that we didn't get to touch on is the ethos in which we do this. So we're not there as police in order to catch the organization out. We're actually there as partners to support and help. A lot of times organizations don't realize how much they do or how much they have done to pull their programs together and make them operate and function and deliver. So we really work with organizations as, you know, in that partnership, supporting them and really helping them kind of, you know, realize all the value that they've created. And a lot of times, some of the feedback that comes back is the benefit of validating all that hard work and effort that maybe has gone unnoticed because it's happened over time or it's evolved organically. It's, you know, it may have been inherited or passed on, and that piece gets lost. So we come in and we're kind of going, oh my God, this is brilliant. And I love how you're doing that. And then the recommendations just sit on top of that to knit what they already have and just make it that little bit better. Yeah. So it's very positive in its intention and it's very supportive.
Yeah, yeah.
Maria has a question about the length of the process, but I have a very strange question. In the US, a lot of companies hire contracting firms to provide all their coaching support to their people. They don't use internal people. They will hire companies to provide external coaches. And could a contracting company get certified in their program that they would provide to a company for coaching?
Yes, that's a good question, Linda. Absolutely, is the simple answer to that. Yes, they can. Now, I'm just going to go back for a moment just to show you the slide around the 9 routes. So what we have here, now if we look at the second column where it says EQA and EIA. So the second column is what we call our quality award, and that's for training providers that train mentors or coaches. So you're right, you know, there's many organizations that will bring in an external organization to train their mentors or coaches. And that organization can be accredited as a training provider.
They don't train the mentors and coaches. They actually provide the coaches.
Oh, I see.
Not mentors.
Yes.
They provide them. Like, I work for like 5 different companies. And those companies contract with a whole bunch of organizations. And those organizations will ask those companies for, let's say, 5 coaches or 20 coaches. I could be one of 5 or 20. So I could work for a lot of different companies. And through like a subcontractor. So could those contractors get certified?
Yes, yes. So just to sort of separate out these different aspects. Now, apologies everyone, the puppy has found her way into my office. I'm just going to pop her back out to my son. Otherwise she'll be far too noisy. Just give me one moment, everyone. I do apologise. Actually, Dana, do you just want to answer the question around individual accreditation for me?
For individual accreditation?
Individual. Yeah, so the coaches being individually accredited. Yeah.
For sure. I'm not sure that it's going to answer your question, Linda, in terms of a coaching organization having an ISMCP level award for how they deliver service. And the reason why it kind of doesn't fit that way, because we look at also design and ongoing management of the program. So it doesn't carry through the 3 elements in quite the same way. So in that regard, it's not an ideal transferable fit.
Right. Thank you.
No worries. And then in terms of individual coaches, I think you had said yourself, you have accreditation as a coach. So the individual accreditation is that equivalent to the coach's own competence and standard of practice.
The other thing I'd add, and I won't bring Trudy, my puppy, onto the call, but thanks. The other thing I'd add is, so for ISMCP accreditation, so the ISMCP sits with the organisation that, in a sense, kind of owns and manages the program as a whole. So it's the program as a whole that sits with the organisation for ISMCP. But an organisation can bring in a training provider, for example, that's accredited to deliver their training, and an organisation can bring in external coaches and mentors as well. So all of that can work, and that can all work within the ISMCP framework. Yeah.
So it's the design and the management piece that rests within the organisation that makes that distinction.
Yeah.
Someone had a question there in terms of how long the process takes.
Oh, yes. So I mentioned that earlier when you're in the breakout rooms. I'll just very briefly reiterate, because obviously you wouldn't have heard that. So it varies. I was just saying, with the Royal New Zealand Air Force, when we accredited their programme, they were coming up to their 10-year anniversary, and they wanted to have the certificate in their hand for their 10-year celebratory event. So they said, could we do it within a 2 to 3 month window from start to finish, which we did. So that was 2 to 3 months, and they had the certificate in their hand and were able to take the picture with their 10-year celebratory anniversary. Medicines Sans Frontières, which was the first organisation we accredited, they did a pre-assessment. Then they said, we'd like to do some work for the next 6 months, then we'll accredit. So their process from start to finish was 12 months, but that's because they asked for 6 months following a pre-accreditation. We did a pre-assessment with them in that sense. So that took 12 months. So it could take 2 to 3 from start to finish. It could take 12. Typically, it's somewhere between 4 and 6 months, but it all depends on the organisation, you see. It all depends on availability of the programme team, the participants, how long it takes to put together the portfolio. So often the time frame is dictated by the organisation and just how long it takes to put things together. So I would say typical organisation between 3 to 6 months for a typical organisation. It can be a bit quicker, and obviously it can be as long as it needs to be for some organisations. I think, do you remember, Dana, how long Northern Trust took? Because I'm thinking back now.
Yeah, Northern Trust were about 4 months.
Yeah.
4 months, and a part of that time was logistics in terms of scheduling the interviews with the groups, because it was kind of a busy period for them. So the pulling together the documentation was very quick. And again, you know, they had been prepared, they'd asked all the right questions. We had a call to kind of go through what it was that they needed, how they could best prepare for that. And then they were very organized, I have to say. They were able to very quickly put their hands on the various elements of that book of evidence that's required. So that part didn't take that long at all. It was more the scheduling of the interviews and the reviews. Yeah.
How long did Doctors Without Borders take?
MSF, so the MSF in Belgium, but their programme is based in Norway. So they were 12 months because we did a pre-assessment where we did a mini version to see whether they were at least bronze, which they were not. So then they asked for 6 months to do some work. They took 6 months and then we assessed, and then they ended up being gold. So they were 12 months, but that's because they requested a pre-assessment first, followed by 6 months to have some time to make some changes. So had they just gone in for the assessment, following the 6 months, it would have been 6 months. And then MSF New York, because there are they're called different sections, different locations. So MSF New York, they were about 3 to 4 months. So they were much quicker. Because they were already utilising the framework that MSF Norway had created. So they were much quicker. They were 3 to 4 months. So Esther, I'm just reading your question there. So an impossible question. Do you want to unmute and just ask us that impossible question?
I'm a passionate educator. I'd love education to be improved. How do you change schools? Public educational institutions? How do you change government offices? How do you help transform systems that don't want to change? It is taking my previous question to another extreme. of how do you make difference in society on large when there is resistance and when money is not the question, when it's politics and lots of different opinions of people.
I
mean, really you guys, with coaching, you can do it. But how?
Julie, my mind goes to some of the volunteer and kind of the social impact groups, and you know, the work that we do through that. Is there anything that kind of fits in terms of what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, well,
there's always scope, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And as you say, there are many different groups that work in a whole variety of spaces that are addressing broader issues. I mean, I think, I go back to the MSF example just because Agnese, who leads the mentoring program, she was presenting on Monday, and her presentation was tremendous, talking about global issues, talking about some of the challenges that they face in some of the regions that they work in. They work in over 60 countries, with political challenges, security challenges, all kind of, every challenge you can think of really in those environments, and how they're able to make a difference in those environments, because whilst they have over 60,000 employees that work for MSF, over 40,000 are national staff. So there's 40,000 are working in their home countries, and then there's additional kind of 10,000 plus that then work in that travel to work in those regions to support them in the most difficult of circumstances. And they're able to affect change through the work that they do, both providing medical assistance, but also providing for those that are in the field that leadership development and support around leadership management and developing sort of confidence and competence. But that's a particular context, obviously, and a particular type of organisation and programme. But I think there are probably some wider examples like that. Sherry Blair, for example, they presented on Monday night and talked about the challenges, the gender challenges that females experience in many countries trying to develop their businesses as entrepreneurs, and some of the societal challenges they experience as women, and the barriers they experience in terms of structures, systems, access to finance, and how through their mentoring program they're trying to create social change and break down some of those systems and barriers. And I think it's perhaps unique to each program and all mentors or coaches in terms of what they're trying to do and their objectives.
Yeah, TOFAS, Julie, had a dedicated element of their mentoring program specifically geared towards diversity and inclusion as well. Again, just trying to create awareness and ensure support systems for inclusion. Also, do we have 2 universities?
Yes, we do. Yes.
So, it seems to be taking hold within our education systems as well,
Absolutely.
Which is wonderful to see. And I think role modeling in that regard is one way to affect change.
Yes, absolutely. But thank you so much, all of you, for such interesting questions and insights. And it's great, really, it is, to have some of these really insightful questions and some challenges as well, actually. And it's good for the team to really think through this quite carefully in terms of what it is that we're trying to achieve as a team within EMCC. So thank you so much to all of you for your contributions. We really do appreciate it. As you know, we've got the final session coming up, and I really wanted to give you a 5-minute comfort break before we join the final session, because we're going to go into, I know, yes, Linda, comfort break, because we're going to go into some breakout groups for that. So I'll probably suggest that we close. If you want to make any final comments in the chat box, you're very welcome to do so. And with the slides that you'll have access to, you'll see my email at the end. You'll also see Chandana and Shelley, who lead on. I'll just show you so you know it's there. The other accreditation routes, and you've got the global website as well. So all of that's there on the slides. So you'll be able to contact me after the session if you'd like to explore more. And of course, I can put you in touch with any of our team, whether that's Dana, Jan, Florentina, etc., depending on which region you're in. But thank you so much for tonight. So good for so many of you to come along. We'll see you in 5 minutes in the closing session. And the links are there to join. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.